Good evening and welcome to Myths for Sleep. I'm James, and tonight we journey into ancient Greece with the captivating tale of Artemis, the silver goddess of the hunt. Discover how this fierce and independent deity shaped the wilderness, protected the innocent, and learned the profound lessons of love and loss beneath the starlit sky. If this story guides you toward peaceful slumber, please like this video and let me know in the comments which mythological tale you'd love to hear next. Your support helps me create more soothing stories for your restful nights. Settle in comfortably and let yourself be carried away by this timeless legend. In the beginning, when the world was young and the gods walked freely among mortals, there lived on the sacred island of Delos a woman named Leto. She was beautiful beyond measure, with eyes that held the depth of starlit skies and hair that flowed like golden wheat in summer winds. Zeus, king of all gods, had fallen deeply in love with her, and from their union would come two children who would shape the very fabric of divine law and mortal understanding. But love among gods is never simple. Hera, Zeus's wife, burned with jealousy so fierce it could scorch the earth itself. In her rage, she decreed that no land should welcome Leto when her time came to give birth. The pregnant goddess wandered from place to place, her steps growing heavier with each passing day, seeking refuge that seemed impossible to find. The earth trembled beneath Leto's feet as she searched for sanctuary. Mountains turned their rocky faces away, rivers dried at her approach, and even the smallest islands fled beneath the waves when they saw her coming. But there existed one place that Hera's curse could not touch. A floating island that belonged to no realm and acknowledged no earthly authority. Delos, once called Asteria, had been a nymph who transformed herself into stone rather than yield to Zeus's advances. Now, as a wandering island, she alone had the courage to defy Hera's wrath. When Leto finally reached its shores, exhausted and near her time, Delos welcomed her with gentle waves and soft, warm sand. The labor was long and difficult, lasting 9 days and 9 nights. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what was to come. Finally, as dawn broke on the 10th day, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Leto's first child was born. This child emerged into the world with eyes already bright with divine wisdom and hands that seemed to reach instinctively toward the light of day. This was Apollo, who would become god of the sun, music, and prophecy. But even as Leto held her firstborn son, she felt the stirring of another presence within her, another soul preparing to enter the world. The second birth was swifter, as if this child was eager to join her brother in the realm of light. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, casting everything in brilliant clarity, Artemis was born. From her very first breath, Artemis was different from her twin brother. Where Apollo's eyes held the warmth of golden sunlight, hers reflected the cool silver of moonbeams. Where he seemed to embrace the world with open arms, she observed it with careful, measuring glances. Even as an infant, there was something wild and untamable about her, a quality that spoke of forest depths and mountain heights, of places where mortal feet had never tread. Leto gazed upon her daughter with wonder and perhaps a touch of recognition. She saw in those silver eyes a reflection of her own fierce independence, her own refusal to be conquered or contained. This child she knew would never belong entirely to any realm or any being. She would be forever wild, forever free, forever true only to herself and her own divine nature. The island of Delos celebrated the birth of the divine twins, for their arrival had transformed it from a wandering rock into a sacred place. Flowers bloomed where none had grown before, springs of fresh water bubbled up from the earth, and birds of every kind came to nest in the newly grown olive trees. The whole island seemed to pulse with new life and divine energy. As the hours passed, something remarkable happened. Little Artemis, barely a day old, began to show signs of extraordinary maturity and wisdom. While other infants would cry and sleep, she watched the world around her with alert, intelligent eyes. When her mother spoke, Artemis seemed to listen and understand, as if the knowledge of ages was already flowing through her divine consciousness. By nightfall, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Artemis spoke her first words. They were not the babbling sounds of ordinary children, but clear, purposeful speech that rang with the authority of divinity itself. She asked her mother about the world beyond Delos, about the forests and mountains she had somehow already seen in dreams and visions. When Artemis was only 3 years old, she displayed a maturity that amazed even the gods themselves. Her small form moved with the grace of a dancer and the purpose of a hunter, and her silver eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. One morning, as the sun painted the sky in gentle pastels, she approached her father Zeus with a request that would define her eternal nature. Zeus sat upon his throne made of clouds and starlight, his mighty presence filling the great hall of Olympus. Lightning played gently around his fingers like tame pets, and his eyes held the depth of infinite skies. When little Artemis entered, her bare feet making no sound on the marble floor, he smiled with the fondness only a father can feel. "Father," she said, her voice clear as mountain streams, "I have come to ask for gifts." Her words carried no childish petulance, no demanding tone. Instead, they held the calm certainty of one who knows her own mind completely. Zeus leaned forward, intrigued by his daughter's composure. "And what gifts does my little huntress desire?" Even then, he recognized the wild spirit that would never be tamed, the independence that would define her for all eternity. Artemis raised her small chin, meeting her father's gaze with unwavering determination. "First, I ask for eternal maidenhood, that I may never be bound by marriage or the desires of any man or god." This request struck Zeus with its profound wisdom. Even at such a tender age, his daughter understood that true freedom required the courage to remain whole and complete within herself. "Second," she continued, "I ask for a silver bow and arrows that never miss their mark, crafted by the Cyclopes who forge your lightning bolts." Zeus nodded slowly, recognizing in this request the soul of a true hunter, one who would always strike with precision and purpose. "Third, I desire a pack of hounds swifter than the wind, and a chariot drawn by deer with golden antlers." Her eyes sparkled as she spoke of these companions, for she understood that the greatest adventures are shared with loyal friends who choose to follow not from obligation, but from love. "Fourth, I ask for 20 nymphs to be my companions, daughters of the river god Amnesios, who will care for my hounds and polish my silver arrows when I am not hunting. Even in her desire for independence, young Artemis understood the value of sisterhood and mutual care. Fifth, I want all the mountains in the world to be my domain, for cities and civilization bring complications that disturb the peace of the soul. This wish revealed her deepest nature, the part of her that belonged to wild places where the ancient rhythms of nature still held sway. And finally, she said, raising her tiny hand to count on her sixth finger, I ask to be the protector of women in childbirth, that I may ease their pain as I once helped my mother during my brother's birth. Zeus marveled at these requests, for they revealed a mind both practical and profound, young yet ancient in its wisdom. His daughter had asked for nothing that would diminish others, nothing born of vanity or spite. Instead, she had requested the tools and authority to live according to her truest nature, to serve both her own divine calling and the needs of those who would seek her protection. All of this shall be yours, my daughter, Zeus declared, his voice rolling like gentle thunder across the mountain peaks. But know that with these gifts comes great responsibility. You will be both fierce protector and impartial judge, guardian of the innocent and punisher of those who violate the sacred laws of nature. Artemis bowed gracefully, accepting both the gifts and the burden they carried. Even as a child, she understood that true power is not about domination, but about service to something greater than oneself. The Cyclopes, those mighty craftsmen who forged the weapons of gods, worked for 7 days and 7 nights to create Artemis's silver bow. They hammered starlight into its frame and strung it with the whisper of wind through pine trees. The arrows they made sang with their own music, each one guided by divine purpose and unerring accuracy. When the bow was complete, Artemis lifted it with hands that seemed born to hold it. The weapon felt like an extension of her own spirit, perfectly balanced and humming with potential energy. She drew back the string and felt the power flow through her, connecting her to every wild creature, every untamed place, every woman who had ever stood alone and chosen strength over surrender. The hounds that came to serve her were magnificent creatures, each one faster than mortal eye could follow. Their loyalty was instant and complete, recognizing in their young mistress a kindred spirit who understood the law of the pack and the honor of the hunt. They followed her not because they were compelled, but because they chose to, drawn by the purity of her wild heart. The deer that would draw her chariot were gifts from the forest itself, creatures so beautiful they seemed made of moonlight and morning mist. Their golden antlers caught the light like crowns, and their eyes held the gentle wisdom of all woodland creatures. They came to her call gladly, understanding that in serving Artemis, they served the spirit of all wild things. The 20 nymphs who came to serve Artemis were daughters of rivers and mountains, each one beautiful in her own unique way. They had flowing hair like waterfalls and voices like the music of streams over stones. These companions chose to follow Artemis not as servants, but as sisters in spirit, drawn to her vision of a life lived in harmony with the natural world. Together, this divine company established their home on Mount Cynthus, where the air was thin and pure, and the view stretched to the edges of the world. Here, among the highest peaks where eagles nested and winds sang ancient songs, Artemis learned the deepest secrets of her nature. She discovered that solitude was not loneliness, but a form of communion with the essential self. In the silence of high places, she could hear the heartbeat of the earth itself. Each morning, as dawn painted the mountain peaks in rose and gold, Artemis would rise before her companions and step out into the crisp air. She would draw her silver bow and practice her aim, sending arrows whistling through the air to strike targets invisible to mortal eyes. Her accuracy was not merely physical, but spiritual, each shot guided by an understanding that true hunting was about balance, not conquest. The goddess learned that every creature in the forest had its purpose, its place in the great web of existence. The wolf who took the weak deer strengthened the herd. The hawk who caught the unwary mouse kept the grain safe for winter. Death and life were partners in an eternal dance, neither good nor evil in themselves, but necessary parts of a greater harmony. As Artemis grew in wisdom and power, she began to understand her role as protector of the natural order. This was not about preventing all death or suffering, for these were natural parts of existence. Instead, it was about preserving the sacred balance, ensuring that no creature or force disrupted the ancient rhythms that kept the world in harmony. One day, as Artemis wandered through a deep forest where sunlight filtered through leaves like liquid gold, she encountered her first great challenge. A group of hunters had entered her sacred grove, not to hunt for food or necessity, but for sport and pride. They boasted loudly of their skill, claiming they could kill anything that walked, flew, or swam. Their arrogance disturbed the peace of the forest and frightened the creatures who lived there. Artemis watched them from the shadows, her silver eyes growing cold with anger. These men had violated something fundamental, the respect that should exist between hunter and hunted, the recognition that taking life was a serious responsibility, not a game. She stepped from behind an ancient oak tree, her presence suddenly filling the clearing like moonlight breaking through clouds. The hunters fell silent when they saw her, sensing immediately that this was no ordinary maiden. Her beauty was terrible and awesome, like the beauty of a winter storm or a mountain avalanche. Power radiated from her slight form, and her eyes held depths that seemed to reflect eternity itself. "You hunt in my sacred grove," she said, her voice carrying the authority of wind through pine branches. "You boast of killing for pleasure rather than need. This is not hunting, but slaughter, and it will not be permitted here." The leader of the hunters, a man whose pride exceeded his wisdom, laughed mockingly. "And what will a young girl do to stop us? Stand aside, maiden, lest you be accidentally hurt when we bring down our quarry." Artemis raised her silver bow, and in that moment, the forest itself seemed to hold its breath. The trees leaned in to witness what would happen, and even the wind grew still. Her arrow sang through the air, not to kill, but to transform, striking the arrogant hunter and changing him instantly into a stag. Where the man had stood, a magnificent deer now stood trembling, his human mind trapped within an animal body. He tried to speak, to explain, to bargain, but only the soft sound of a deer's call emerged from his throat. The other hunters stared in horror and amazement, finally understanding that they faced divine power. "Now you will know what it means to be hunted," Artemis said quietly. "Your own hounds will pursue you, and you will feel the fear that you have brought to countless innocent creatures. Perhaps in time, you will learn the difference between taking life from necessity and taking it from cruelty." The transformed hunter bounded away into the forest, his own hunting dogs baying in pursuit, not recognizing their master in his new form. The remaining hunters fled, their arrogance replaced by terror and, hopefully, wisdom. This was Artemis's first great act of divine justice, but it would not be her last. Word spread quickly among mortals that there was a goddess who protected the wild places, who demanded respect for the natural world and punished those who violated its sacred laws. Some feared her, calling her cruel and merciless. Others understood that her anger was never random, never petty, but always in service of maintaining the balance that kept the world whole. The nymphs who served Artemis watched their mistress with growing admiration. They saw in her not just power but wisdom, not just strength, but compassion for all living things. She taught them that true protection sometimes required harsh measures, that love for the innocent might demand sternness toward the guilty. As the seasons turned and years flowed like rivers to the sea, Artemis's reputation grew throughout the ancient world. Mothers in labor would call upon her name, and she would come to them in the darkest hours, bringing comfort and the strength to bring new life safely into the world. Her hands, which could draw the deadly bow with such precision, could also soothe pain and guide the difficult passage from womb to world. There was a young woman named Callisto, one of Artemis's most beloved companions, whose beauty was matched only by her devotion to the goddess. She had taken the sacred vows of maidenhood, promising to remain forever chaste and true to Artemis's path. Callisto's laughter rang like silver bells through the forest, and her skill with the bow was second only to that of Artemis herself. She was joy personified, a spirit so pure and bright that even the most cynical hearts softened in her presence. But the gods of Olympus were not always respectful of mortal vows or divine protections. Zeus, ever drawn to beauty and innocence, noticed Callisto during one of his wanderings and was immediately enchanted. Despite knowing that she was under Artemis's protection, despite understanding the sacred nature of her vows, he pursued her with the relentless determination that characterized all his desires. Zeus approached Callisto in disguise, taking the form of Artemis herself to gain the young woman's trust. In this deception, he violated not only Callisto's innocence but also the sacred bond of trust that existed between goddess and devotee. When the terrible deed was done and Zeus revealed his true form, Callisto was left broken and afraid, carrying within her a child she had never chosen to conceive. For months, Callisto hid her condition, wrapping herself in loose garments and avoiding the communal baths where her companions might discover her secret. She lived in constant fear and shame, knowing that her goddess valued purity above all else and might not understand the true circumstances of her fall from grace. The weight of her secret grew heavier with each passing day, like a stone in her heart that made every breath a struggle. When the truth could no longer be hidden, Artemis discovered Callisto's pregnancy during a ritual bath beside a sacred spring. The goddess's silver eyes flashed with anger so fierce that the very air around them seemed to crackle with divine power. In that moment, Artemis felt not only betrayal, but profound disappointment, believing that her trusted companion had willingly broken her sacred vows. "You have violated your oath to me," Artemis said, her voice cold as winter wind through bare branches. "You promised to remain pure, to live according to the sacred laws of our sisterhood. Instead, you have chosen the path of mortal women, the weakness of flesh over the strength of spirit." Callisto fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face like mountain snow melting in spring. She tried to explain, to tell the truth of Zeus's deception and violence, but her words came out as broken sobs that seemed only to confirm her guilt. In her divine anger, Artemis could not hear the plea for understanding hidden within her companion's tears. With a gesture of her hand, Artemis transformed the weeping woman into a bear, condemning her to wander the forests in animal form. "Since you have chosen to live like a beast, driven by animal desires, then as a beast you shall remain," the goddess declared. But even as she spoke these words, something deep within her divine heart whispered that this punishment might be too harsh, too swift, too final. Callisto, now in the form of a great bear, fled into the deepest parts of the forest, where she gave birth to a son who would grow up never knowing his true mother. She lived for years in this transformed state, her human mind trapped within an animal body, watching from afar as her child grew strong and brave under the care of shepherds who found him abandoned in the wilderness. The other nymphs who served Artemis watched these events with troubled hearts. They loved their goddess truly, but they also loved Callisto, and some began to whisper among themselves that perhaps the punishment had been too severe. They remembered Callisto's pure heart, her genuine devotion, her joy in serving Artemis. Could someone so true in spirit have truly fallen so far from grace through mere weakness of will? As time passed, Artemis herself began to feel the stirrings of doubt. In quiet moments between hunts, when the moon was dark and the forest filled with shadows, she would remember Callisto's tears, the desperate way she had tried to speak before the transformation took hold. Had there been more to the story than simple betrayal? Had her swift anger prevented her from hearing the full truth? The goddess began to observe the bear that had once been Callisto, watching from hidden vantages as her former companion lived her solitary life in the wilderness. She saw how gently the bear treated other forest creatures, how she never killed except in the direst need, how she would sit for hours gazing up at the stars as if remembering a time when she had walked upright beneath them. There was something profoundly human and heartbreakingly noble about this creature's bearing. One day, Callisto's son, now grown to be a mighty hunter named Artemis, encountered his mother in bear form while hunting in the sacred grove. He raised his spear, not knowing that the beast before him had given him life, preparing to make what he thought would be a glorious kill. Callisto, recognizing her child despite the years that had passed, stood perfectly still. choosing to die rather than flee from the son she had never been able to hold. In that moment of perfect tragedy, Artemis finally understood the full cruelty of what she had done. She saw clearly that her swift judgment had been founded on incomplete knowledge, that her anger had blinded her to the possibility of innocence. With divine speed, she intervened, stopping Arcus's spear in mid-flight and revealing the truth of his mother's identity and suffering. The revelation of Callisto's innocence struck Artemis like lightning from a clear sky. She had punished a victim rather than a transgressor, had let her sacred anger blind her to the truth of divine cruelty. In that moment of recognition, the goddess felt something she had rarely experienced: the weight of regret and the burden of responsibility for pain she had caused unjustly. With tears in her silver eyes, tears that fell like drops of moonlight to the forest floor, Artemis knelt beside the bear that had been her beloved companion. "Forgive me, dear Callisto," she whispered, her voice soft as the wind through summer leaves. "I acted in haste and anger, judging without seeking truth, punishing without understanding the full measure of your suffering. But even divine power has its limitations, and Artemis found that she could not fully undo what had been done. The transformation had gone too deep, lasting too long to be completely reversed. However, she could grant a different kind of redemption, a peace that transcended the boundaries between earth and sky, mortal suffering and divine rest. Artemis lifted both Callisto and Arcus gently into the night sky, transforming them into constellations that would shine forever among the stars. Callisto became Ursa Major, the Great Bear, while her son became Botas, the Bear Guardian, forever watching over his mother with protective love. In this celestial form, they were reunited at last, their story written in light across the darkness of eternity. This experience marked a profound transformation in Artemis herself. She had learned that even divine judgment could be flawed, that wisdom required not only strength and authority, but also patience, compassion, and the humility to admit error. From that day forward, she vowed to listen more carefully, to seek truth more thoroughly, and to remember that justice without mercy was merely vengeance in disguise. The goddess began to spend more time among mortal women, observing their struggles and understanding the complexities of their lives. She saw how they faced dangers not only from wild beasts and natural disasters, but from the very men who claimed to protect them. She witnessed the courage required to bring life into a world that could be so cruel to the innocent, the strength needed to nurture and protect children in times of war and hardship. There was a young woman named Iphigenia, daughter of King Agamemnon, whose story would test Artemis's commitment to her new understanding of justice. When the Greek fleet gathered at Aulis to sail for Troy, they found themselves trapped by contrary winds that would not allow their ships to depart. The seer Calchas declared that Artemis was angry and demanded the sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter to appease her wrath and release the winds. But this was not Artemis's doing. The winds were held by other forces, and the demand for Iphigenia's death came not from divine justice but from mortal ambition and the cruel politics of men who valued conquest more than innocence. When Artemis learned of the plan to sacrifice the young woman in her name, she felt a familiar anger rising within her. But this time it was directed at those who would use her reputation to justify their cruelty. On the day appointed for the sacrifice, as Iphigenia was led to the altar with courage that shamed the warriors around her, Artemis acted with the swift compassion she had learned from her mistakes with Callisto. At the moment when the priest's knife descended, she spirited the young woman away, leaving a deer in her place upon the altar. The Greeks, seeing the substitution, believed their goddess was satisfied, and the winds immediately began to blow. Artemis carried Iphigenia to her temple in Tauris, a land at the edge of the world where the goddess was worshipped with profound reverence. There, the young woman became a priestess, serving the goddess who had saved her life and finding in this service a purpose greater than any mortal marriage could have provided. Iphigenia discovered that she had been rescued not just from death, but from a life of limitation and dependency. In the sacred groves of Tauris, surrounded by other women who had chosen or been called to serve Artemis, Iphigenia found a different kind of family. These were sisters of choice rather than blood, bound together by shared purpose and mutual respect, rather than the accidents of birth. They created a community where strength was valued over beauty, wisdom over compliance, and integrity over convenience. Artemis watched over this community with deep satisfaction, seeing in it a reflection of what she had always envisioned for mortal women. Here, they could live according to their own values, pursue their own purposes, and support each other in times of trial. They were not prizes to be won or property to be owned, but individuals with their own divine spark, their own connection to the sacred mysteries of existence. The goddess began to understand that her role was not simply to punish those who violated the natural order, but to provide sanctuary for those who sought a different path. Her temples became refuges where women could escape unwanted marriages, where they could develop their minds and spirits without interference, where they could discover the strength that had always lived within them. Many came seeking this sanctuary, daughters of kings and farmers alike, drawn by stories of the goddess who protected those who wished to remain free. Some stayed for a few years before returning to the world with new confidence and wisdom. Others dedicated their entire lives to the goddess's service, finding in devotion to Artemis a fulfillment they could discover nowhere else. Among these devoted followers was a young woman named Artemis, whose skill in hunting rivaled even that of the goddess herself. She had fled to Artemis's protection to escape the unwanted advances of King Minos of Crete, and in the goddess's service, she found both safety and purpose. Artemis became Artemis's most trusted lieutenant, organizing the temple communities and teaching new arrivals the skills they would need to thrive in their chosen life of independence. The bond between Artemis and her followers was unlike any other relationship in the divine or mortal realm. It was based not on fear or obligation, but on mutual choice and shared values. The goddess offered protection and guidance, while her followers offered devotion and service freely given, without coercion or expectation of reward beyond the satisfaction of living according to their deepest convictions. As centuries passed like seasons in an eternal cycle, Artemis's influence grew beyond her temples and sacred groves. She became a symbol of hope for women throughout the ancient world, a reminder that strength and independence were not masculine virtues alone, but qualities that belonged to anyone brave enough to claim them. Her stories spread from village to village, carried by midwives and healers, by mothers teaching their daughters, by women who had found courage in her example. The goddess continued to walk among mortals, though often in disguise, observing the changing world and adapting her protection to meet new challenges. She saw how civilizations rose and fell, how laws and customs shifted like sand dunes in the desert wind, but how certain fundamental truths remained constant across all cultures and ages. The need for justice, the desire for freedom, the fierce love that drives a mother to protect her children. These things never changed. In the great city of Ephesus, the people built a temple to Artemis that was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Its marble columns rose like a forest of stone trees toward the sky, and its inner chambers housed treasures from across the known world. Pilgrims came from distant lands to worship at her altar, bringing offerings of silver and gold, of precious gems and fine cloth. But Artemis found greater joy in the simple shrines built by ordinary people in quiet places. A small altar beside a mountain spring where women came to pray for safe childbirth meant more to her than all the magnificent temples. The humble offerings of wildflowers and honey, of carved wooden animals and simple clay vessels, touched her heart more deeply than the costliest treasures. These gifts came not from obligation or ceremony, but from genuine gratitude and love. One evening, as the sun set behind purple mountains and the first stars began to appear, Artemis encountered a young hunter named Orion. He was different from the arrogant men who had troubled her sacred groves in earlier times, for he hunted with respect and took only what he needed to survive. His skill with the bow was remarkable, second only to her own, and he moved through the forest with the quiet grace of one who understood he was a guest in nature's realm. Orion sought no conquest over the wild places, but partnership with them. He spoke to the animals as friends, thanked the plants he gathered for medicine, and honored the spirits of the creatures he was forced to take for food. In him, Artemis saw a reflection of what mortals could become when they remembered their place in the great web of existence. For the first time in her eternal life, Artemis felt something she had never experienced before, a warmth in her heart that was not maternal protection or sisterly affection, but something altogether different. She found herself looking forward to their meetings in the forest, to their conversations about the secret paths known only to deer and wolves, to their shared appreciation for the beauty of sunrise seen from a mountain peak. This feeling troubled the goddess deeply, for she had vowed eternal maidenhood and had never wavered in her commitment to independence. Yet here was a mortal man whose company brought her joy without threatening her freedom, whose presence enhanced rather than diminished her connection to her true nature. She began to wonder if perhaps her understanding of love and partnership had been too narrow, too fearful of possibilities that might actually enrich rather than enslave. But the other gods watched these developments with interest, and in some cases, jealousy. Apollo, her twin brother, worried that his sister's growing attachment to a mortal would somehow diminish her divine nature. He could not understand that love, when freely chosen and mutually respectful, might actually strengthen rather than weaken the soul. One day, as Artemis and Orion hunted together in a meadow filled with morning light, Apollo decided to test his sister's commitment to her vows. He appeared before them in disguise, taking the form of a rude shepherd who insulted Orion and challenged him to prove his hunting skills. The challenge seemed simple enough: to hit a distant target that appeared to be floating far out at sea. Orion, always ready to demonstrate his abilities and defend his honor, drew his bow and sent an arrow flying across the water with perfect accuracy. But Apollo's challenge had been a cruel deception. The target was not a mere object, but Orion himself, transformed by the god's power into something unrecognizable from such a distance. When Artemis realized what had happened, when she saw her beloved friend floating lifeless in the waves, struck down by his own skill turned against him through divine trickery, her grief was like a force of nature itself. She wept tears that became shooting stars, and her cries of anguish echoed from mountain to mountain like thunder without end. In that moment, she understood that love, even when freely chosen, always carried the possibility of profound loss. With infinite tenderness, Artemis lifted Orion's body from the waves and placed him gently among the stars, where he would hunt forever across the night sky. She gave him the brightest stars for his belt and surrounded him with the animals he had respected in life, creating a celestial hunting ground where he could pursue his passion for eternity without causing suffering to any living creature. The loss of Orion changed Artemis in subtle but profound ways. She did not become bitter or cruel, but her understanding of love and loss deepened beyond what even divine wisdom had previously encompassed. She learned that the heart can hold both infinite joy and infinite sorrow, that the capacity to love fully requires the courage to face the possibility of grief. This experience made her an even more compassionate protector of mortal women, for she now understood something of what they felt when they lost husbands to war, children to disease, or lovers to the cruel chances of existence. Her comfort became more profound because it was born not just of divine power, but of shared understanding of loss and the strength required to continue living after the heart has been broken. In the twilight of the ancient world, as old gods began to fade and new beliefs rose like dawn over distant mountains, Artemis's role began to evolve once more. She watched civilizations transform themselves, saw temples converted to new purposes, witnessed the gradual shift in how mortals understood the divine and their relationship to the natural world. Yet through all these changes, her essential nature remained constant, a beacon of independence and protection in an ever-changing world. The goddess found that mortals still needed what she had always offered, though they might call it by different names or seek it through different practices. Women still required courage to live according to their own values rather than others' expectations. Children still needed protection from those who would harm the innocent. The wild places still required guardians who understood that some things were sacred beyond human ambition or greed. Artemis began to work more subtly, inspiring rather than directly intervening, planting seeds of strength in human hearts rather than displaying obvious divine power. She appeared in dreams to midwives, giving them knowledge that would save both mother and child during difficult births. She whispered guidance to women facing impossible choices, helping them find the courage to choose truth over convenience, integrity over safety. She blessed the work of those who protected forests and mountains, rivers and meadows from destruction. The nymphs who had served her so faithfully throughout the ages began to take on new forms as well, becoming the spirits of conservation and preservation that moved in human hearts. They inspired painters to capture the beauty of wild places, writers to tell stories that reminded people of their connection to nature, and activists to stand up for those who had no voice. The divine sisterhood expanded beyond the boundaries of any single culture or religion. In quiet moments, when the moon was full and the world lay sleeping beneath its silver light, Artemis would visit the places that had been most sacred to her throughout the centuries. She would walk through the ruins of her ancient temples, feeling the echoes of prayers that had been offered there across thousands of years. Each prayer had been heard and answered in its own way. Each seeker had been guided according to their needs and capacity. The goddess reflected on all she had learned throughout her eternal existence. She had discovered that true strength was not the absence of vulnerability, but the courage to remain open and compassionate despite the pain that openness could bring. She had learned that justice without mercy was mere vengeance, but that mercy without justice was merely weakness in disguise. Most importantly, she had understood that independence did not mean isolation, but the freedom to choose one's connections and commitments from a place of strength rather than need. Her relationship with her twin brother Apollo had evolved as well, deepened by shared experiences and mutual understanding. They had both made mistakes born of divine pride and limited perspective. Both learned to temper power with wisdom and judgment with compassion. Their different natures, his association with light and reason and hers with mystery and intuition, now complemented rather than competed with each other. They had become true partners in the work of guiding and protecting humanity. As the ages turned and the world continued its endless dance of change and continuity, Artemis found her greatest satisfaction in the small moments of triumph that occurred in individual lives. A young woman finding the courage to leave an abusive situation. A mother successfully defending her children from harm. A community coming together to protect a sacred place from destruction. These victories might not be recorded in history books or celebrated in great monuments, but they represented the true measure of her divine purpose. The goddess understood now that her story was not separate from the story of every woman who had ever chosen courage over comfort, truth over convenience, love over fear. She lived on in every act of fierce protection, every moment of wild freedom, every choice to honor the sacred over the profitable. Her silver arrows flew through every decisive moment when justice prevailed over cruelty, when the innocent found protection, when the natural world was preserved for future generations. In the end, Artemis realized that immortality was not about lasting forever in the same form, but about becoming part of something eternal and ever-renewing. Her essence had become woven into the very fabric of existence, present wherever beings chose independence over dependence, wherever mothers protected their young, wherever hunters showed respect for their prey, wherever women supported each other in the face of adversity. The moon continued to rise and set, marking time with its eternal rhythm. The forests continued to grow and change, sheltering countless creatures in their green depths. The mountains stood firm against the passage of time, their peaks touching the sky like prayers made manifest. And in all these places, in all these cycles, the spirit of Artemis continued to dwell, eternal and ever-present, a reminder that some things in this world remain sacred, some freedoms are worth defending, and some loves are strong enough to last forever. The ancient stories spoke truth when they said that Artemis was the goddess of the hunt. But the greatest hunt of all was the eternal quest for meaning, for justice, for the courage to live according to one's deepest values. In this hunt, every human being could become her companion. Every choice for truth and courage could be an arrow loosed in her name. Every act of protection and preservation could be a prayer offered at her eternal altar. And so the story of Artemis continues, not as ancient mythology, but as living truth, written anew in every generation by those who choose the path of fierce love, wild freedom, and sacred responsibility. Her silver light continues to shine on all who seek the strength to be truly themselves, the wisdom to protect what matters most, and the grace to love without losing their essential independence. In this way, the goddess remains forever young, forever wild, forever free, and forever present in the hearts of those who understand that the greatest treasures in life cannot be owned, only honored and protected. I hope this journey through Artemis's timeless tale has brought you the peace of moonlit forests and starlit skies. May the goddess's gentle strength guide you toward deep, restorative sleep. If you found comfort in this ancient story, please subscribe to discover more mythological tales that will cradle your nights with wonder. You can now let this video continue playing in the background. The relaxing music that follows will help you drift even deeper into slumber. Close your eyes and allow your body to surrender completely to rest. Like Artemis watching over her sacred groves, this soothing melody will watch over your dreams,